Alright. It's pretty late right now. It's like 3 in the morning. But I wanted to get this video done. It's Zoe here. We're doing part 2 of our perk priority tier list for the killers. Which perks I think you should get, which ones I think you should prioritize in getting, teachables I think you should prioritize in gettings, and which ones I think you should leave for later. Part 1 was already released. We covered kind of the first half of the tier list. You can go check that out. I'll post a link to it in the description below. And we're going to move on to part 2. We're hopefully going to finish it up. We're definitely going to finish it up. We only have a little bit left to go. So why don't we, without further ado, get right on it. For those just joining us who don't feel like watching the first part, once again, this is sort of a tier list on what perks I think you should prioritize in getting first, and which perks I think you should prioritize in getting later when you're getting the teachable perks for the killers. Again, this isn't a tier list based on strength. It's based on when I think you should be getting the perks. Obviously, strength is slightly related to this, but it's not a direct show of strength. There are definitely some perks I'd move around. If I was making an actual perk tier list based on their strength, there'd be some perks that would move around. Additionally, the tier list is not in order in any fashion. It's just ordered in the tiers, or the tiers are just ordered. It's not ordered within the tiers. So without further ado, let's get started. First one we got is Deathbound. Deathbound is a perk from the new killer, Pyramid Head, the Executioner. It's unlocked at level 40 from him. It's a level 40 teachable. And how Deathbound works is when a survivor is healing another survivor, if they complete that heal and they are at least 32 meters away from you or more, the healer will scream, showing their location. And if the healer and the person that healed them travel a certain distance apart from each other, both of them will become oblivious. It's not a bad perk. It's kind of like this weird inverse Nurse's Calling. You could run it alongside Nurse's Calling, and you basically always know when someone is healing. The only downside of the perk is it only applies if people are getting a heal from one of their teammates. If the person self-heals through inner strength or self-care or a med kit, then the perk doesn't do anything for you. But I can see why they'd make that decision. It might be a little crazy or might be a little unbalanced if it just went for every heal. The extra Oblivious status effect is a cool little side bonus from it. Something the killer or the survivor certainly have to play around if it gets inflicted upon them. However, I don't think it's going to be anything too crazy. I don't mind this perk. I think it's actually pretty decent. I think it's pretty alright. I think it works on certain killers that are forcing you to heal a lot, like the Legion. I quite like it on the Legion, actually. I think it gives you information. You know what 2 survivors are doing as soon as it procs, which is pretty great. Don't think it's too bad. I think it's alright. Nothing wrong with it. Next up is going to be Dark Devotion. Dark Devotion is a pretty funny perk. It's one of my favorite perks in the game, actually, when it decides to work, or when it pays off for you, I should say. Dark Devotion is a teachable from the Plague, unlocked at level 40, and it's an obsession perk, so it creates an obsession in the match, which robs you of a bit of information. You now basically have to always assume the survivors are running Decisive Strike or any other obsession perk. You can't play around you having no obsession and, having access to that kind of information. Basically robs you of that. How Dark Devotion works is whenever you perform an M1 basic attack on the obsession, it actually gives them a terror radius. It gives them a terror radius for 30 seconds. It's a default 32 meter terror radius. It doesn't give them your terror radius, so if your terror radius is 28 meters or 24 or whatever, it does not give you it does not give them your terror radius. It gives them a 32 meter terror radius, and it also gives you the undetectable status effect for those 30 seconds. It's a pretty good perk. It's not bad. It sucks that it's kind of limited to M1 basic attacks. For killers that don't use their M1 all the time, then you're kind of losing value out of it. But for killers that do use their M1 all the time and frequently, might pay the bills. It's pretty funny on a killer like Michael Myers, especially when he's in tier 3, as you can basically stealth your way through tier 3. It's not bad if you're planning to slug quite a bit. You can slug the obsession, and if anyone tries to go and pick them up, they'll start hearing the terror radius, and if they don't immediately recognize that as Dark Devotion, they might think that you're proxying or something like that, which will obviously slow down the fact that they're trying to go and pick up the slug, which is never a bad idea. Ultimately, though, it's kind of a niche perk. You kind of have to play around it a little bit. It works best on killers that can get around the board pretty quickly, such as the Hillbilly, the Nurse, the Oni, Demogorgon, The only problem is a lot of these killers, I mentioned this in the last video, a lot of the killers that can get around the board really fast are also very loud. So the undetectable doesn't really help them a whole lot, but it might, you know, mess up a survivor here and there. Since the last video, the Hillbilly rework and all that actually got released, so it actually does probably work. It actually works quite nicely on the Hillbilly now with some of his new add-ons, being able to, the Apex Muffler, being able to mute your chainsaw if a survivor is outside your terror radius, this making you undetectable. You could potentially down the Obsession with your M1, and then use your chainsaw, get across the board, maybe have some extra information perks to help you out there, and sneak up on someone, get a cross-map chainsaw. That could be a pretty funny way to snowball the game in your favor. But once again, pretty situational, and there's definitely a lot better perks for other things, but not a bad perk. Something you could definitely check out if you're into that sort of thing. And there's some wacky things you can do with the fact that the survivor gets the terror radius. One of the best things about Dark Devotion is it can't be countered by a Swift, really, or by comms. Yes, the survivor who is the Obsession can call out, oh, hey, this killer has Dark Devotion. But that doesn't completely kill the perk's value, actually. Sure, it gives the survivor the terror radius, and they can announce, oh, hey, guys, I'm pulling up to this gen, I have a terror radius, don't worry about it. But it doesn't take away the fact that you're still undetectable for 30 seconds. There's a lot you can do with that undetectable status effect. So, good survivors won't even expect it, since it's such an underused perk, they won't know what's going on immediately. And even if they call it out to their friends, if they're in a Swift, won't matter a whole lot, as you're still undetectable, and they have to play around that, which is pretty nice. The next perk we're going to be talking about is Enduring, and Enduring is a pretty decent perk. It's a level 30 perk unlocked from the Hillbilly. It's oftentimes paired alongside another perk called Spirit's Fury, which we talked about in the last video. It can sometimes be run by itself. It's not bad if it's run by itself, actually. It's definitely better than Spirit's Fury when it's run by itself, but it's definitely a perk that you kind of need to have something like Spirit's Fury alongside of it to really get the full effect. What Enduring does is it simply reduces the pallet stun duration. It reduces it by half at max rank. Excuse me. That's all it really does. It doesn't reduce. It used to reduce any stun. Doesn't reduce all stuns anymore. It just reduces pallet stuns. It's a pretty nice perk if you're just planning to swing through every pallet. When you're running Enduring, your main game plan is just literally going to be to swing through every pallet. You're never going to respect pallets. It doesn't matter what the pallet is, safe, unsafe, whatever the pallet, you're just going to want to swing through it to get, you know, as much Enduring value as possible. It's great in situations if the survivor is needing to play around getting a stun for a pallet, actually. It actually is, quite honestly, the best, I think, at unsafe pallets, because at that point, it doesn't matter what the survivor does, they're basically dead. They either don't get the stun and they're dead because you just walk around and hit them because it's an unsafe loop, or you swing through, you get stunned, and it doesn't matter because you're so fast out of the stun that you basically catch up to them. Maybe it takes an extra second, but you'll catch up to them in like a second and just M1 them anyways, or down them anyways, whatever it is. It's pretty nice on certain killers. It has some extra quality of life stuff on like the Legion, where it allows you to get out of your Feral Frenzy quite faster, as people love to drop pallets on the Legion whenever they're in their power for some oddball reason, don't know why. Like I said, it's really most used with the perk Spirit's Fury, which essentially allows you to just end a chase for free. You can just swing through a pallet, have it dropped on you, break the pallet, have very little stun duration, and then just catch up to the person, swing, hit them, down them, and move on. Pretty alright perk if you're into that kind of thing. If you're a very aggressive killer player, then it might be your kind of playstyle. If not, then maybe not something you're looking for. Very middle of the road perk, nothing wrong with it really, very balanced. Next perk is Overcharge. Overcharge is a doctor perk unlocked at level 40, and Overcharge is the one skill check perk that I am not going to shit on. I shit on the other skill check perks earlier for the main reason that good survivors pretty much always hit their skill checks. Overcharge is the one kind of exception to this rule, because Overcharge is a little weird and it's a little hard to hit sometimes. What Overcharge does is whenever you kick a generator, it essentially marks it with Overcharge, and the next time a survivor starts repairing that generator, they get a tremendously difficult skill check that they have to hit, and if they miss the skill check, they actually get some additional regression applied to the generator, and obviously you get the loud noise notification. The tremendously difficult skill check they have to hit is the same exact skill check as Decisive Strike, which means they're probably going to hit it most of the time, as they're very akin to hitting that skill check. However, they're not going to hit it all the time, where most of the time survivors are prepared to hit their Decisive Strike skill check. They know they have D-Strike, they know they're getting picked up, they know they're about to hit it. not all survivors are going to know they have to hit the Overcharge skill check, and it can kind of catch them at the worst possible times. It sort of has that unexpected factor to it. Obviously, this goes away once they realize you have the perk, and they'll be more prepared for it, but it can get out a couple of cheeky skill checks. You can have them miss a skill check every now and then and be a little cheeky about it. My phone just vibrated. I'm sorry if you heard that, but I think out of all the skill check perks, it's probably the best one. It actually combines really well with Unnerving Presence, which is a perk we talked about in the last video, which is a trapper perk that reduces skill check sizes. It actually combines with that and makes it a really, really small ass skill check. It's very, very hard to hit that skill check. That's one thing it's got going for it. If you're interested in some interesting synergies, that's one of the possible synergies you could be running with. In my opinion, I mean, if you've got nothing else to run, you can combine it with Pop Goes the Weasel and maybe squeeze out a little extra regression on your generators, some extra information. Pretty middle of the road perk. It combines well with other perks like Huntress's Lullaby and Unnerving Presence. They're not the best perks in the world, but it still combines pretty well with them. And funny thing is, if a survivor taps the generator and they walk away from it, they still have to hit the skill check, which means they have to hit the skill check on the move, which can be pretty funny. Pretty middle of the road perk, like I said. Best skill check perk I'd think out there. Unlock the Doctor at level 40. Not a bad choice, all things considered. Next one is Hangman's Trick, which is a level 30 teachable unlocked from the pig. And Hangman's Trick is a perk that recently, not too long ago, a couple months ago, got a rework. It used to be very, very bad. Now it's pretty alright, pretty situational, but not terrible. Basically, it's an information perk. How it works is, one thing it does is it gives you a notification whenever a survivor is saboing a hook. This is fucking useless, no one cares. Sabotaging got a rework recently, along with when this perk got reworked, where originally sabotaging, for anyone who's not familiar, sabotaging used to be a much longer action. It had skill checks. The action bar stayed consistent, so if you got a hook to 50% and it came back to that same hook, it would be 50% sabotaged. But it took a lot longer. It was a much more dedicated action, had skill checks involved with it, and really the strategy was to 99 a hook, and then whenever a killer was carrying someone to that hook, you just tap it once, it sabotages it, and basically they're forced to slug that person. Obviously, this perk was a lot different back in the day. It did pretty much the same thing, where it gave you a notification whenever someone was saboing a hook, which was much more useful because the saboing action took a lot longer. Nowadays, they reworked the whole saboing system to be more save-based. It happens very quickly. It happens in about like 2.5 seconds. There's no skill checks. The progression isn't saved. It's pretty much always used for just last-second saves. If you see someone is being carried to a hook and you have enough time to sabo the hook, you can go down, sabo it, 2.5 seconds, boom, drop the hook. They're forced to slug them most of the time, unless they have another hook nearby. So that part isn't going to do anything for you. The main feature of the perk is that whenever you're carrying, while you're carrying survivors, it shows the aura of survivors who are within 6 meters of hooks in general, of every hook, which is not bad. It's not terrible. It's not great. It's not bad. It can give you some extra information. It's an interesting way to collect information. It can be a little awkward sometimes as you're carrying the survivor around, and also, you need to kind of juggle the whole wiggling system and all that, and also look around at what's going on. Can be a little awkward sometimes, but if you get used to it, it's not actually that bad of a perk. Decent information perk. It works great if you combine it alongside the Putrid Oak, which is one of the offerings you can have as killer, which moves the hooks closer together, which will give you some more information. Otherwise, I don't really have a whole lot to say about the perk. If you're looking for a different information perk, it's not terrible. The numbers could be buffed a little bit. If it was like 12 meters at max, that would be absolutely amazing. 10 meters even would be really good. 6 meters is a little bit close to the hook. They kind of have to be right on top of it or walking through it. But depending on how long you're carrying the survivor, you can carry the survivor for a pretty long time and try to get maximum value out of it. But, so, not terrible, not great. A lot of these perks that we're talking about are kind of middle of the road. They do one thing. They're not bad at what they do, they're just not great at what they do, and there's better options. But for a change of pace, not terrible. Next up is Rancor. Rancor is a very funny perk as it's a complete fuck you to one person in particular. Rancor is an obsession perk. It creates an obsession. We already talked about this. Having an obsession robs you of some information regarding decisive strike and all that. We don't really need to explain that whole system again. And what Rancor does two things. First of all, whenever a generator is completed, Rancor is going to show you the location of all the survivors for 3 seconds. It's not going to be an aura, it's going to be a loud noise notification, as if it was Infectious Fright and they just screamed. Additionally, though, whenever a generator is completed, the obsession is going to see your aura for 5 seconds, I think. Let me see in my... I didn't write down the time in my notes, but I think it's 5 seconds that the obsession sees you. So the obsession knows you have this perk as long as they're paying attention and don't have object of obsession and can always see you. But the main kicker to this perk is after the last gen is completed, the obsession becomes exposed, and they're also moriable. So you down them in one hit, and you're also able to kill them. As I said, it's a huge fuck you to one person in particular. If that person happens to be a solo queue player, there is zero way that they can communicate that they are the Rancor. The other players have no idea that they are the Rancor unless they just have a really lucky guess, until pretty much they go down in one hit and are starting to get moried. So it really sucks for that one person, and it's one of the hardest perks to deal with in the game if you're solo queuing probably and you're affected by it. So very, very unfortunate. That being said, it's not a bad information perk. Being able to see all the survivors for 3 seconds, just having their location revealed on the map for you after a gen gets done can be a huge deal. At the right time, that could give you a lot of information that you need. You know, you could see, oh, someone's over there doing a totem, someone's over there doing that gen, someone's, you know, fucking off in the corner, doing whatever, who cares? You know, you can see the obvious person that just completed the gen. Which is pretty great. It's pretty good information. Even Dark Sense doesn't provide that level of information. Dark Sense is nice as it gives you the aura of the survivors for 5 seconds, but only the ones that are nearby the generator that just got completed. This does it for all survivors, and it's guaranteed to happen at least 5 times per match if you get to the end of the game, which is not bad. Really good information perk. Being able to know where everyone is, solid, and information is very valuable as the killer. So, not terrible, and comes with that added little lethality at the end of the game. A lot of times people will like to run this alongside something like Save the Best for Last. On killers that can't particularly preserve their stacks of Save the Best for Last, you know, who are forced to M1 all the time, but they want to run that perk, they can sometimes run it alongside Rancor so they can basically just ignore the obsession all game, which isn't a great idea. You're basically just letting them do gens and do whatever they want and ignoring them. So unless you're really getting a hardcore snowball off of the other 3 survivors, it's not always the greatest thing, but it can be nice combined with some other, you know, obsession perks. Remember Me is another great one, as it discourages the obsession from actually doing the exit gates at the end of the game and, you know, countering your Remember Me. Next up is the perk Hex Retribution. Hex Retribution is a Deathslinger perk unlocked at level 40 from the Deathslinger. And it's a Hex perk that once again creates a Hex totem on the map. There are 5 Doll totems that spawn in at the beginning of the trial for every trial in Dead by Daylight, and one of these becomes a Hex totem, which has the associated Hex perk to it. And if, you know, they cleanse the Hex totem, then that Hex perk is disabled. The thing is, Hex Retribution is a trap totem, basically. It's basically a trick. It's a trap for the survivors. You want them to cleanse this totem as it actually gives you a little bit of a buff. Retribution does 2 things. First off, when a survivor starts cleansing a Doll totem, they're going to get the notification that you have Hex Retribution, but they're also going to become oblivious for 45 seconds at max rank, which isn't bad. Not a bad thing. Nothing you really care about too much. You really care about the secondary effect, which is whenever a survivor cleanses a Hex totem, it doesn't matter if it's this Hex totem or any other Hex totem, it reveals the location of all survivors for 10 whole seconds, which is a pretty big deal. We just got done talking about how Rancor can give you some really important information. If Retribution pops at the right time, also this isn't loud noise notification, this is actual aura reading, so you're seeing the aura of survivors constantly for 10 whole seconds. If this pops at the right time, the right place, the right time, just good. It's just that could win you the game right there. If you're playing someone like Plague or Michael Myers or Oni, anyone who has a burst-based power, who has a period of time where they're incredibly strong, and a Retribution pops and you know where everyone is, that can be a really big deal for you. If it pops while you're in a chase, suddenly the survivor can't mind game you like, oh, you just know what they're doing all the time. if it just pops no matter what, just wherever, you can take stock of what everyone's doing. 2 people on a gen, 1 person searching a chest, yada yada yada, all that stuff. It's not a bad perk. It's great. Obviously works better if you combine it alongside another hex perk, one that you care about more, that you don't want to go down, as it increases the chances that that perk won't get cleansed. And when that perk does get cleansed, you actually do get a little bit of a boon out of it, as it procs off of every hex perk, assuming that Retribution wasn't the first thing that got cleansed. That being said, not a bad hex perk. There's going to be a better kind of hex trap perk we'll talk about later on, called Haunted Grounds, which will be a tier above this one in my opinion, but it's not bad at all, and in the right situation, it can be particularly deadly. Next perk we're going to talk about is Shadowborn. Shadowborn is a level 40 unlockable from the Wraith, and Shadowborn does one thing, and it increases your FOV. Why is this valuable? I know what you're asking. Why is this valuable? Why would you call this average priority? Why do I think you should get this, kind of at some point relatively sooner than some of the other perks we talked about? Increased FOV can be a pretty big deal on certain killers. On the Nurse, on the Spirit, on the Billy, on the Huntress, on a lot of killers that need to take in a lot of information in a short period of time. Having an increased FOV and having an increased vision field can really, really help. It can get you away with a lot of things. It's very commonly run on Nurse, as it helps deal with kind of the bullshit low FOV that this game has for killers by default, which can make a lot of people sick. And in general for Nurse, it just makes it a lot more comfortable to play her, especially in my opinion. Right now, I am dedicated to running Shadowborn on Nurse. Maybe one day I'll take it off and get used to it. But being able to absorb information in a wider field of view and being able to absorb it faster when you have to absorb it fast, when you're playing someone like the Billy or the Nurse, when you need to absorb information as soon as possible, it's not a bad idea. It's not a crazy perk. It's not great. I think it works well on a lot of the higher tier killers that need to absorb all that information very quickly, and can also get away with running a perk that really isn't going to help them in chase or anything. Like Nurse doesn't care about chase perks. She's a fucking queen at chasing people. She'll end the chase in 10 seconds if she's good. So she doesn't care about running something like Bamboozle or whatever, Throw on Shadowborn, help yourself out in another way. You'll do great. So I don't think it's a bad perk. Does one thing, has one purpose, but the purpose is pretty nice. And it's a nice quality of life perk. It just feels good to run. Next perk is Make Your Choice. Make Your Choice is a level 40 teachable unlocked from the Pig once again. Make Your Choice is a very decent perk, but it requires you to play around it. Make Your Choice is one of those perks that a lot of people, when they first run it, they're kind of like, wow, this perk is bad. It just doesn't do anything for me. It feels like it's not doing anything for me. Make Your Choice is one of those perks you kind of have to tailor your build around. You kind of have to play around a lot more, and it works exceptionally well on certain killers and not as well on other killers. What Make Your Choice does is if a survivor gets unhooked 32 meters away from you, the person that just unhooked that survivor is going to be exposed for 60 seconds. Which is great. You just go down in one hit. That's awesome. That's great if you're a killer lacking lethality. A lot of the lethality options in this game, as far as being able to insta-down survivors, are fairly inconsistent. Most of them are bound to some form of RNG via a Hex Totem. Make Your Choice is great because it's consistent lethality. It's not bound to a Hex Totem. It's just always there as long as you're playing around it. It works great on something like Windstorm Wraith, where you're able to hook a survivor, go cloak, and just zoom across the map, go pop the generator in the distance, and after they get saved, zoom back, be stealth, find the person that just unhooked them, and surprise attack them and just take them down in one hit. Absolutely amazing. It works great on other killers that can get across the map really quickly, such as Demogorgon with his portals. If you really wanted to, you could run it on Billy, because he can get across the map pretty fast, but he's got the chainsaw for the insta-down. Works great on Nurse, works great on Spirit. Any killer that can travel the map quickly, get across the map quickly, go somewhere, and come back after the person gets unhooked is going to be a great choice for Make Your Choice. No pun intended. It also combines well with a perk we'll talk about later called Devour Hope, which is a huge snowballing perk once you get it up and running, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Otherwise, Make Your Choice is a great lethality option, just a consistent lethality option. You just have to kind of tailor your build and your killer and play around it a little bit. It's not a perk you can really just leave in the background and kind of expect it to do something for you. You have to actively kind of work with it. You have to walk away from the hook. It does kind of eliminate your ability to proxy camp. I mean, you can still proxy camp if that's really the play you need to go for, but you're going to be losing value out of the perk, obviously. But it can really get a snowball rolling for you. Walk away from the hook, they get unhooked, actively track down the person who just unhooked them. So it works great with tracking perks because you obviously need to find that person because they're probably going to be playing quite stealthy after they unhook the survivor and they know that they're exposed. Next perk is Nemesis. Nemesis is a level 40 unlockable from the Oni, and Nemesis is another one of those perks similar to Enduring that works well when it's paired in a combo, and it works well when it's paired with the next perk we're going to talk about called Play With Your Food. In fact, I'm kind of tempted to talk about them together. But first off with Nemesis is an Oni perk, like I said, level 40 unlockable, and all it does is whenever you get stunned, it switches the obsession to whoever just stunned you. It doesn't matter what kind of stun it is. It can be head-on, it can be pallet stun, it can be a DS stun. DS already switches the obsession though. It can be a flashlight stun. Whatever it is, if it stuns you, it switches the obsession to the person that stunned you, and it also makes them oblivious for 45 seconds. Or not 45 seconds. Maybe it's 45 seconds. I didn't actually write it down, unfortunately. Well, it makes them oblivious, and it also reveals your aura to them. Or it also reveals their aura to you. Sorry, it's a little late. So why is this good? Well, first of all, we talked about the perk Furtive Chase, which also switches your obsession around. Furtive Chase is a decent way to switch the obsession, but it's a bit weird. You have to track down the obsession first, you have to down them, you have to hook them, you have to get them unhooked. It's kind of a roundabout way of doing it. All you have to do for Nemesis to work is just eat a pallet. You literally just have to swing through a pallet, eat a pallet, and then they become the obsession. This makes it really good if you're running it alongside perks that interact with the obsession, which is why it's really good on this next perk we're going to talk about called Play With Your Food, which is a level 35 teachable from Michael Myers. It might be level 30, actually. I think it's level 30. Level 30 teachable from Michael Myers, and how Play With Your Food works is anytime you let the obsession go, anytime you exit chase with the obsession, you gain a stack of it, and every stack of Play With Your Food that you gain grants you 5% movement speed. Just 5% movement speed to everything. It has a maximum of 3 tokens, and you don't need to farm the obsession for all 3 of those tokens. You just need 1 token, that 1 extra token. If you're a 115 killer, now you're suddenly moving at 120. You're moving at Bloodlust level 1 speed. That's all you need to be able to end chases just that bit faster. And anytime you perform an aggressive action, such as a chainsaw or an M1, you're going to lose a stack of Play With Your Food. It works great because with Nemesis Play With Your Food, you can forcibly eat a pallet, and they become the obsession, and then you exit chase with them, and you get a stack. It's an easy way to get stacks to Play With Your Food. It works great on a lot of killers who have problem in chases, or a lot of killers who need that extra speed boost to do something. It's most notable on the Leatherface. Nemesis Play With Your Food is insanely disgusting on the Leatherface. It actually makes him so much more scary of a killer. Leatherface without Nemesis Play With Your Food, he's not crazy scary. Ever since the rework, he's definitely a lot more decent, but he's still, without it, he's still not someone I'm afraid of. Leatherface with Nemesis Play With Your Food, even back before his rework, was a pretty scary force to deal with. The obvious counter is to just pre-drop pallets all the time, but if he's in a situation where he can just forcibly eat the pallet, there's not a whole lot you can do. And when he has that extra movement speed, he's catching up to you a lot faster, and he's going to be able to get that insta down a lot quicker, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it sometimes. So, a very deadly combo. Again, though, similar to Make Your Choice, it's a combo you kind of have to play around. You have to adjust your play style, adjust how you're playing around it. You need to play around Nemesis Play With Your Food, then expect it to just, you can't expect it to just do something. You can't just run the 2 perks together and just have it chilling in the background. You gotta contribute to it, obviously. But otherwise, great combo. One of the most lethal combos in the game in the right hands, especially on a killer like Leatherface, like we talked about. But not much else to say about it. Let's move on. Going up into our next tier, the high priority. These are perks that, obviously that are very strong. These are perks that I would generally prioritize getting. They are great in a lot of situations. Without further ado, let's move on. First perk we're going to talk about is Surveillance. Surveillance is a level 35 perk or level 35 teachable unlocked from the Pig. Pig has some pretty decent perks across the board. We pretty much just talked about all of them in this video. They're all pretty great, to be honest. But Surveillance is an information perk, and it's a very valuable information perk. How it works is whenever a gen is regressing, it's going to be shown in white to you. Its aura is going to be white. Whenever a survivor starts doing that generator, the generator becomes yellow for 16 seconds at maximum rank, which is pretty awesome. It tells you when a generator stops regressing and a survivor is starting to work on it. Not only that, but it also makes it so gen noises are hearable from an extra distance away, which is even greater. You don't have to like walk all the way over to the generator to actually hear the generator being done. You can kind of just, it saves you a little extra time when checking on your generators, basically, if you have surveillance, which is pretty awesome. A little quality of life thing, but nothing, it's not what the perk's there for. That's not the main focus of the perk. The main focus is the other aspect, which is the information gathering. Alongside any type of regression perk, Ruin, Surge, Pop, just kicking generators in general, but obviously alongside those regression perks, it's a very strong combo, especially with Ruin. If you can leave your Ruin is a Hex perk, we'll talk about it in a second, but if your Ruin stays up for an extended period of time and you're running Ruin in Surveillance, it gives you infinite amounts of information. You're pretty much always going to know when someone's doing a generator, basically, and what generators they're doing. It's without a doubt the strongest information combo in the entire game. The amount of awareness you have is insane. But obviously that's unfortunately bound to RNG a little bit, as if Ruin gets cleansed, the Surveillance by itself is a lot less strong. Going around and kicking generators is great, but having perks like Surge really help out. Anything that can help regress a generator really makes Surveillance shine. It's absolutely amazing in a 3-gen or 4-gen strategy, as you're going to be able to control those generators really, really well. Really, really, really well. So it's a great perk. I love it. It's an amazing information perk. Even not alongside regression perks, it's pretty solid still. Even just going around kicking generators. As the game starts to come to a close with 3, 2, 1 generator left that the survivors have to do, it just gets stronger as you're going to be able to, proxy these generators a lot more. And utilize that surveillance, of course. Next up is the perk Save the Best for Last. This is a very popular perk. It's a pretty great perk. Save the Best for Last is a Michael Myers perk unlocked at level 40. And how Save the Best for Last works is, well, first of all, it's an obsession perk. It creates an obsession. We've been over this, we understand why that's not always the greatest. Robs you of a bit of information, but it's not really that big of a downside that you have to deal with. How Save the Best for Last works is every time you M1 a survivor that's not the obsession, you gain a stack of Save the Best for Last, and every stack of Save the Best for Last gives you 5% extra cooldown to successful attacks. Whenever you hit a successful attack in Dead by Daylight, you go through a kind of weapon cleaning animation. It's this little cooldown animation, and the survivor is able to kind of get away at that point. They're able to use their speed burst to get some distance on you and get to the next loop or get to a safe area. Save the Best for Last is going to reduce that for you, and it caps out at 8 stacks, which is a whole ass 40% of cooldown reduction for successful basic attacks, which is a huge deal. After hitting someone with max stacks, you're cleaning your weapon very, very quickly, which means you can catch up to them a lot faster, which means it could definitely make the difference between them being able to get to a safe loop and you just being able to down them right after. Obviously, if you're chaining hits on a lot of survivors, it's going to really help you out there. Anytime you hit the obsession with an M1 attack, it's going to reduce your stacks by 2, unfortunately, but that's obviously the balancing mechanic to the perk. So that's for us is just great. It's just a great perk. It's amazing. Even on killers that have to M1 the obsession, can't save the stacks in some way, it's still great on. It's still a great choice if you're playing around it. But killers like the Demogorgon or the Pig, Demogorgon and Pig are two really, really good users of Save the Best for Last, and now also maybe Pyramid Head to some extent as well if you're particularly good with your M2. This is because things like Demogorgon's Shred and Pig's Dash don't consume stacks of Save the Best for Last as long as they're hitting the obsession. Or if you hit the obsession with your extra M2 attacks, it does not consume stacks of Save the Best for Last, which is great. It's amazing. Basically, you could just... Ooh, sorry, yawning. Basically, you can just get your 8 stacks and then just keep them. Once you find the obsession, you can just use your alternate form of damaging them and be able to keep those stacks. And additionally, if the obsession dies, you keep all your stacks. You don't lose the effect, you don't lose your stacks. You just keep all the stacks. Your goal is to probably get around 5 to 8 stacks permanently after killing the obsession. So you sacrifice the obsession. If you have 7 stacks, you keep those 7 stacks and you never have to worry about them again. And it's just absolutely amazing. It's a perk that's not going to do anything for you at the beginning of the game, obviously, but when you get to the mid to late game, it's really going to shine through, and it's probably going to end up doing something for you, hopefully. Most likely. It's going to get you out of some sticky situations for sure. But great perk, absolutely amazing, highly recommend it. Next perk is the perk Nurse's Calling. Nurse's Calling is a perk unlocked from the nurse at level 40, and it's a information gathering tool. Anytime a survivor is healing 28 meters away from you, they're going to have their aura revealed to you. It shows the person getting healed, and it also shows the person doing the healing. It's great. It's amazing. That's awesome. It is very, very good alongside perks that slow down healing, such as Thanatophobia, such as Sloppy Butcher, Dying Light. People like to combine Nurse's Calling with these perks as it forces people to do the healing action for a longer period of time, which can result in you getting more Nurse's Calling value. And it obviously works great on any killer with a reduced terror radius or a stealth killer. Things like Wraith, Ghostface, really, really good with Nurse's Calling. Unless the killer or the survivor has Spine Chill, they pretty much have no way of knowing if you're stealthed that you're pulling up on them while they're healing. You're catching them most likely off guard in a very vulnerable area, and it's going to probably result into a free down for the most of the time. It's a great information perk, very lethal, and most of the time, if you're playing around it, gets you a lot of downs and allows you to catch survivors out a lot of the time. Awesome perk, would recommend it. Next up, we have the perk Hex Devour Hope. Devour Hope is one of the strongest perks in the game, actually, when it decides to work. But the problem is it's caked in RNG. It's a Hex perk, obviously, so it's bound to a Hex Totem if the Hex Totem gets cleansed. Boo-hoo, too bad, so sad, unfortunate. It's out of the game. And that's really where this perk, unfortunately loses a lot of its a very hot and cold perk. Devour Hope is a perk that you need to build up to. How it works is whenever you hook a survivor, if that survivor gets unhooked, I think 32 meters away from you, you gain a stack of Devour Hope. At 1 stack, Devour Hope does nothing. At 2 stacks, Devour Hope is going to give you increased speed for 10 seconds after you hook a survivor. Really nothing special either. At 3 stacks, though, every survivor becomes exposed. They go down in 1 hit. Basically, every survivor is just an insta-down for you with your M1 attack, which is insane. And they don't know this either until they actually get hit by an M1. So it's not like as soon as you get the 3rd stack, everyone gets the notification. They basically have to wait until you actually hit someone, and then it happens, which is great. And God forbid, if it gets to 5 stacks, you can just start killing people once they're down on the ground. It's basically like having a Mori. You can just kill them, and that's awesome. It's great, isn't it? The problem is, it's a Hex Totem. Obviously, rightfully so. If it wasn't a Hex Totem, it would literally be the best perk in the entire game. It would be insanely strong. But if they cleanse the Hex Totem, you lose the effect of Devour Hope. So this leads to quite a few things. If it gets cleansed within the first 15 seconds of the match, it does nothing for you. If it gets cleansed within the first minute of the match, it does nothing for you. Because of the fact that you have to build up to Devour Hope, you have to build up the 3 stacks to actually have it become a pretty good perk. There's a lot of chances the survivors have to just kind of stumble across the totem and be like, oh, the Hex Totem, I'm going to cleanse it. And if you lose it, then that's just a whole perk slot down the drain and a whole potential snowball down the drain. When it works, though, it's one of the strongest perks in the entire game because it literally can just win a game for you right off the bat if Devour Hope stays up. People love combining it with the next perk we're going to talk about called Haunted Grounds, but if you enjoy a high-risk, high-reward playstyle, I would really recommend Devour Hope. There are a couple of killers that can actually utilize Devour Hope pretty well. things like Trapper and Demogorgon, if they're killers that can keep watch over their Devour Hope very easily, that they work great with it. I think the Pig works exceptionally well with Devour Hope, because when survivors have traps on their head, they're oftentimes not, looking around for totems and all that. They're oftentimes focused with doing the boxes. As long as you get some survivors down, slap on some head traps, they're most likely not looking around for totems before it's too late and you're already starting to smack people with Devour Hope, which is pretty awesome. Works great alongside Make Your Choice, albeit it's a bit of a predictable combo. Some people, if they know you have Make Your Choice and they see a Hex Totem, they're automatically going to assume that it's Devour Hope, as it combines quite well with Make Your Choice. Otherwise though, great perk. If you like high risk, high reward, absolutely go for it. Otherwise, if you want consistency, maybe not the best perk for you to run. Next perk is Haunted Grounds, Hex Haunted Grounds. Haunted Grounds is another Hex perk. It's a perk unlocked from the Spirit at level 35. And it's once again, another trap-based Hex perk. It's not a real Hex perk, it's one that you want the survivors to cleanse. How it works is Haunted Grounds spawns two Hex totems in the trial. Two dull totems become Hex totems. When a survivor cleanses one of those Hex totems, every survivor becomes exposed for 60 seconds at max rank. It's awesome. They're down in one hit with your M1 attack. It's absolutely great. It leads to a lot of snowball situations. It basically gives you a free in the pocket snowball as long as the Hex perk, or as long as the totem gets cleansed, which oftentimes is why people actually run this perk alongside other Hex totems, as it's a great way to defend your Hex totems, as theoretically speaking, there is a better chance of them cleansing Haunted Grounds than there is of them cleansing, say, Devour Hope or Ruin or any other Hex perk that you're going to utilize, which is pretty awesome. Obviously, though, still subject to RNG. If they see it and you're not running any Hex perks and they know you're not running any Hex perks, they're just going to assume it's Haunted Grounds and they're not going to cleanse it. If they just so happen, if you're just really unlucky and they just do end up cleansing the right Hex perk, it's just going to sit there and do nothing for you. So there are a couple of situations where Haunted Grounds ends up not doing anything for you. But for me, most of the time I run Haunted Grounds, it ends up getting me some nice value and ends up getting me a couple of cheeky downs. You just gotta know how to play around that 60 seconds where survivors are probably going to be playing very immersed and very hidden, as they don't want to, encounter you and get downed by you. The next perk is I'm All Ears. I'm All Ears is a chasing perk. It's unlocked at level 30 from Mr. Ghostface, and it's not a bad perk. It basically prevents the survivor from mind gaming you sometimes. How it works is whenever a survivor performs a rushed action within 48 meters of you, they're going to have their aura revealed for a couple of seconds, and it does have a cooldown of 40 seconds at maximum rank. So why is this good? Well, there's a lot of reasons. First of all, big situation that you always come up to as killer. Say you're running a jungle gym. They're pulling up to the window, they fast vault the window. You don't know what they're going to do. You don't know if they're going to go left, right. You can make a guess. You can see what they're doing, but who knows if they double back on that or any of that shit. I'm All Ears prevents any of that. It shows you their aura. It shows you exactly what they're doing, and you can basically just play around that yourself. It's absolutely amazing. It basically helps you out with your chases. You don't have to mind game. You don't have to guess. As soon as they performed a rushed action, a fast action, you're just going to have perfect information on what they're doing for a couple of seconds. Pretty great. Not a whole lot else I can say about it, to be honest. It's a very decent chasing perk. I like it quite a bit. It pairs well with killers that, have some form of something they can do through a wall. It pairs great with a Nurse, pairs great with Pyramid Head, Huntress to some extent, pairs alright with Piggy, Demogorgon. It works well on every killer, and it pairs exceptionally well on certain killers. So it's not a bad perk. I can pretty much only recommend it, to be honest. If you're struggling with your chases, if you're struggling with mind gaming the survivors, figuring out what they're doing, I'd really recommend picking up I'm All Ears. It's going to be kind of like a nice little, I don't want to call it a crutch, but it's definitely going to make it a lot easier to deal with some of the classic mind games survivors like to pull on you during chase. It's going to help you end those chases a lot faster and not spend a whole lot of time dedicated to chasing. So, good perk. Next perk is Infectious Fright. Infectious Fright is a Level 35 perk unlocked from the Plague, and Infectious Fright is one of the best perks for snowballing in general. How Infectious Fright works is if you down a survivor if you put a survivor into the dying state, every survivor within your terror radius is going to scream and reveal their location. This is great. This is amazing. If you're a killer like the Oni, Michael Myers, Plague, Hillbilly, Nurse, if you're a killer who can move very fast or has a period of time where they're very strong, you're going to love this perk. You're going to down someone. Classic use is on the Oni. You're in your power. You're in your demon form. You're down and you're able to insta down. You dash across the map. You find someone, you down them. Suddenly, Claudette screams a couple meters away from you. She was, crouching in the corner or whatever. You didn't notice her at first. Infectious Fright basically just got you a second kill. Infectious Fright is going to help you out. It's going to tell you when you should be slugging, basically, for a period of time and getting extra pressure on other survivors. Slugging is a huge part of the killer's game plan. It's very hard against decent survivors to just play this game honestly. Just down a survivor, pick them up, hook them, go to the next survivor, down them, pick them up, hook them. Repeat this process for all the survivors. You're never going to get anyone. The gens are going to be done. People might be on death hook, but they're just going to leave. They're just going to exit the trial. One of the strongest things you can do as killer is to slug people in the right circumstances, and Infectious Fright is going to tell you those exact circumstances for slugging people. You down someone, you hear someone scream, even if you're not a killer with a fast insta-down who can get over to them, you can leave that person slugged for a couple of seconds, walk over to them, maybe get a cheeky hit on them, get a lot going for yourself. It's great. It's just an honestly great perk. It's good on basically every killer in the game pretty much. There's only a couple of killers it's not good on, mainly stealth killers who unfortunately can't fully utilize it due to their stealthy nature. And maybe a few other killers I might be missing, killers with smaller terror radiuses and all that jazz. But otherwise, it's pretty much a great perk on almost every killer in the game, and it's an exceptionally good perk on certain killers in the game who are fast, catch survivors out, and particularly ones that have insta-downs. Just awesome. Amazing. It's one of my favorite perks in the game. Next up is a perk that synergizes quite well with an Infectious Fright, actually, and it's called Monitor and Abuse. Monitor and Abuse is a doctor perk unlocked at level 35. And Monitor and Abuse does a few things for you. The main thing it does, the main attraction of it, is that when you're out of chase, it's going to lower your terror radius by 8 meters. And when you're in chase, it's going to raise your terror radius by 8 meters, which you don't particularly care about, as who cares what your terror radius is in chase. But having your terror radius 8 meters lower when you're out of chase is amazing. It's going to let you catch a lot of survivors out of position more, as they're going to have less time to react to you approaching them. On killers like the Deathslinger, the Hag, Huntress, who have smaller terror radiuses to begin with, it's great on them. It makes their terror radius even smaller. That's amazing. Having a Hag with a 16 meter terror radius is pretty scary. Michael Myers with a, I want to say 8. Yeah, Michael Myers at tier 2 with an 8 meter terror radius, still walking at 115 movement speed, is pretty goddamn scary, to be honest, and is really horrifying and very strong. The other thing it does is it does increase your field of view by a little bit. It increases your field of view by a couple of meters when you're outside of chase. However, it does reduce that field of view once you get into chase. Some people don't like this aspect of it. They think it kind of gives them this weird like tunnel vision effect, as when you enter chase, your field of view suddenly becomes smaller. For me, it sometimes makes me feel a little weird. It, makes me be like, whoa, what the hell is going on? I don't like that. But most of the time I'm able to ignore it. If that really is an issue for you, you could leave the perk at tier 1, as the field of view is the part that actually gets affected by the leveling of the perk. So leaving it at tier 1 and having the field of view be a smaller change might help out if you're not into that aspect of the perk. But otherwise, it's a amazing perk. You care about what your terror radius is when you're outside of chase, because you want to sneak up to survivors and catch them out of position, but you don't care about what it is during chase. In fact, it's even better because it combos with Infectious Fright by making your terror radius bigger, which is awesome. Next perk is the perk called Hex Ruin. Hex Ruin is a very infamous perk. It's a perk unlocked at level 35 from the Hag. Yes, level 35, I believe. Level 35 from the Hag. It's one of the most infamous perks in the entire game, as for a very, very long time, Hex Ruin defined the killer meta. Before it got a rework back in January, I want to say, the beginning of the year, Hex Ruin was a very different perk. It was one of the only perks, in fact, it still is the only perk to ever exist that slowed down the generators from the start of the game. I'm not going to fully explain what old Hex Ruin did, as that's not really what this video is about, but basically, TLDR is it, and it was and still has only been the only perk ever to regress, be able to slow down generator time from the beginning of the game. There will be a perk we'll talk about in a second called Corrupt Intervention, which kind of does this, but not to the extent that old Ruin did. And it defined the killer meta for years, as almost every killer could run it, and a lot of killers did run it because they didn't want to have to deal with gen speeds at the beginning of the game. It was a very easy band-aid issue to sort of gen speeds at the time. Unfortunately, attacks to a Hex Totem, so if it got cleansed, very unfortunate to you. It has since then been changed quite a bit, actually, and it is no longer as strong as it once was. It's no longer as meta-defining as it once was, but I still think Ruin is a very, very solid perk, especially on the right killer, and if you play around it quite well. What Ruin does is whenever a generator is not being worked on, it is getting regressed at 200% the normal speed, which is awesome. It's free regression. It's free regression you don't have to do anything about. You don't have to touch that generator. It just regresses. It's amazing. The only problem is it's bound to a Hex Totem, so if it gets cleansed beginning of the match, then it doesn't really help you. Additionally, with Ruin, you actually have to do something about it. Survivors can kind of just power through Ruin if they just stick to generators, which kind of sucks. So you actually have to go and kick them off those generators for Ruin to actually work. This is why it's great on killers with a lot of map pressure. Billy is one of the best users of Ruin. He's able to get across the map very quickly. He's able to kick survivors off of generators very easily. He's able to get a lot of use out of Ruin. If you're a slow killer, if you're a killer like the Trapper, the Hag, Huntress to some degree, if you're a slow killer who has trouble getting around the map, Ruin is not going to be probably the best option for you, as you're not going to be able to get a lot of use out of it, as your best usage for it is being able to kick survivors off of generators, so you're able to maximize that regression. Otherwise, it's a perk that's inconsistent regression, but when it does stay up and when you can play to it, it is very, very, very good. Would recommend it. It's awesome. Comes with the Hag. She comes with some other great perks. And it combos well with Surveillance that we just talked about. Surveillance plus Hex Ruin is one of the strongest combos in the entire game, as it gives you some solid regression and gives you insane information. But it is bound to the fact that it is a Hex Totem or a Hex-based perk, so it's a little RNG oriented. Next up, we're moving on to our top priority tier. This is the perks I think you should absolutely get as soon as possible. They're just good perks. They're just amazing perks. They'll work on every killer. They'll work on every situation pretty much. There's not many times you wouldn't want to go without these perks, basically, unless you were going for something specific. Oftentimes you could build every single killer with any of the perks that are in this tier, and it would be totally fine, to be honest with you. But that gets a little boring, doesn't it? Either way, let's move on. The first perk we're going to talk about is Serge. This is a Demogorgon perk unlocked at level 30. It's the first perk he gets, which is great because his other two perks are garbage. But Serge is, without a doubt, in my opinion, Serge is probably the strongest regression perk in the game currently. And it's unfortunate because I think it's still quite a bit slept on. What Serge does is whenever you down a survivor with your basic attack, this is the one downside of Serge, is that it has this weird basic attack association with it, which I don't like. But whenever you down a survivor with your basic attack, all generators within a 32-meter radius are going to lose 8% of their progress, and they're going to start regressing. That has a bit of a cooldown of 40 seconds at max rank, but it's just free regression. It's just great. That's awesome. If you down them with your M1, the generators are going to explode around you. You're going to get a loud noise notification for it, and you're going to get free regression, which is amazing. It's great. There's not a whole lot I can say about it. The best thing about it is the fact you don't need to do anything for this. You just have to down a survivor, which is really the greatest part about it. As far as time efficiency goes, this is awesome. You don't have to go around kicking generators all the time. You don't have to go around kicking people off generators. It's just consistent, good regression, and that's what we care about when you're playing Killer. It's a perk that's consistent as long as you're downing them with your M1, and it's a perk that works. The best thing about it too is it's not bound to your terror radius. It's fixed at 32 meters, which could be good and also bad. You know, it does prevent it having some interesting synergies with like large terror radius builds or whatever, but honestly, I think it's better this way, as it makes it work great on stealth killers, who are oftentimes some of the most M1 based killers in the game. The only downside to Serge is its cooldown, the fact it's bound to M1, and sometimes on larger maps it can be a little bit stinky, as you're not always getting a generator within 32 meters when you down a survivor. On something like a map like Mother's Dwelling, which is huge, you're not always getting that value. But particularly in a 3-gen scenario, this thing is nasty. If you have a 3-gen setup and you have Serge, you play your cards right, the survivors can't win that situation, honestly. That's just going to be tough for them. And also hard punishes people who try to greed for generators because they have like adrenaline or something like that. Absolutely going to hard punish that sort of play. It's an amazing perk. I recommend it. It's bailed me out of a lot of situations as Killer. Next perk we're going to talk about is Barbecue and Chile. Actually, we're going to... Well, no, we'll talk about them separately. I was going to talk about two perks at the same time here, but let's just talk about them separately. The next perk is Barbecue and Chile. Barbecue and Chile is a level 35 teachable from the Leatherface, the cannibal. Barbecue and Chile is great. It's an information gathering perk. After you hook a survivor, basically every other survivor who is greater than 40 meters away from the hook is going to have their aura revealed to you for a couple of seconds. It's awesome. One of the best things, one of the most important times for Killer is knowing where to go after you hook a survivor. Barbecue is basically going to give you that information, telling you where to go after you hook a survivor. The only downside to Barbecue and Chile is the fact that survivors can get into lockers to counter it. If they get into a locker, you actually won't see their aura, which is one of the unfortunate counters to Barbecue and Chile, and it's something that a lot of people know and a lot of people play around when they have the opportunity to play around it. But otherwise, it's a pretty decent aura revealing perk, or a pretty decent information perk. It works really, really great on killers like the Hillbilly, Demogorgon, Freddy, killers that can get across the map very, very quickly. It's going to work great on. And it's going to work great basically any killer. The only downside is that one inconsistency with it, where basically it just doesn't show people who are either, you know, within 40 meters to the hook or are in a locker somewhere, which is unfortunate. But in addition to this, every time you hook a survivor, it's going to give you 25% extra blood points at the end of the game. This is extra to your total blood points. So every time you hook a survivor, it gives you a stack, as long as it's a unique survivor hooked. And at 4 stacks, you're going to double the amount of blood points you get at the end of the game. People sometimes just run it for just that purpose, and honestly, that's pretty great. Helps you out with the grind in the game, gets you more blood points, gets you information, important information, and is pretty good. Little inconsistent at times, but I think it works well. Next perk we're going to talk about is Corrupt Intervention. It's a perk unlocked from the Plague at level 30. Corrupt Intervention, how it works at the start of the game, the 3 furthest generators from your current spawn location are going to be blocked for 120 seconds at the start of the game. Corrupt is amazing. Corrupt is absolutely amazing. There are a lot of stinky maps in this game. Mother's Dwelling, Mount Ormond, just off the top of my head, Temple of Purgation to some degree. There's a lot of maps that are really big, have bad generator spread, and for a lot of killers who don't have great map mobility, which is pretty much most of the killers in this game, to be honest, that have trouble rotating around the map earlier on in the game, you do not want generators, you know, miles away just flying on you because you weren't able to get there fast enough. Corrupt Intervention is basically going to help you out with that. It's going to make the map, you know, pretty much, it's going to make the map smaller for the start of the game for at least the first 2 minutes, as really the only part of the map you're going to care about is the 4 generators that are unblocked, which is awesome. Sometimes you can get kind of a bad Corrupt Intervention. You can sometimes get it. A lot of the times you want your Corrupt Intervention all on one side of the map. You want, you know, 3 gens that are blocked to basically be next to each other. Sometimes if you spawn in like the middle of the map, you'll have 2 gens that are blocked next to each other, and a gen, you know, all the way to your left that's blocked that is separate from them, and that can kind of suck sometimes. But no matter what, Corrupt Intervention is helping you stall the game in your favor for the first 2 minutes of the match, which is awesome. It's amazing. I recommend it. It's great. I run it in a ton of my builds sometimes. For a lot of killers who struggle to get around the map, especially early on in the game, just good. And even against on those killers, it's still good. Like, there's nothing wrong with running this perk. Just great. It's consistent. It's amazing. It's always going to help you. It's never not going to help you, basically. And it helps you at one of the most important parts of the game, which is the beginning of the game. So, and not a lot of perks can say that. Next perk is Discordance. Discordance is a level 30 perk unlocked from the Legion. Discordance is a information perk, and how it works is whenever more than one survivor is on a generator, or on the same generators, 2 or more survivors are on the same generator, that generator is going to turn yellow, and it's going to give you a loud noise notification. Going to give you a loud noise notification. What's the word I'm looking for here? It's going to give it to you fairly often. It's going to give it to you like every few seconds or whatever. That's awesome. Basically, it lets you know whenever survivors are stacking generators. When survivors start stacking generators, not the scariest thing in the world. It's much more scary if survivors are splitting generators. But when 2 survivors are on a generator, it takes that generator from being 80 seconds to being completed to like 45 seconds to being completed, which is not a lot of time to go over there and secure that generator. Discordance is great as it tells you where multiple people are in one area, which is awesome. That's great for you. It can help you out at the start of the game. Sometimes, a lot of the time, survivors will spawn together and they'll kind of just hop on the first generator they see, which is amazing, as Discordance is going to immediately show you where to go, and it's going to immediately show you where multiple survivors are. Even when a lot of people who aren't a fan of Discordance, they kind of quote the fact that Discordance doesn't always tell you this. It can be kind of predictable when a killer has Discordance if they're always walking over to the generator with multiple people on it. It can be easy to call out that they have Discordance. But even when Discordance isn't activating, it's still giving you information. When Discordance isn't activated and you're in a chase, you should always assume the worst and assume that now 3 other survivors are splitting generators, which is the worst thing possible. That's 3 different generators that are being pressured across the board, potentially in nasty places where it could screw you out of having a 3-gen strategy. It's just bad for you, and it's just going to show you that you cannot commit to that chase for too long. You need to get what you can out of that chase, rotate across the map, kick survivors off generators, rinse and repeat, all that jazz. When it works, it tells you exactly where to go, and when it's not working, it's still giving you information by telling you kind of what the survivors are doing to some degree. Great perk, recommend it. It's one of the best information perks in the entire game, in my opinion, and maybe only superseded by this next perk we're going to talk about, which is a level 35 teachable from Ghostface, and it's Thrilling Tremors. Thrilling Tremors is essentially barbecue. It's very similar to barbecue and chili. A lot of people compare the two because essentially they are very similar and kind of do the same thing. But Thrilling Tremors is barbecue and chili on crack, basically. I don't want to say Thrilling Tremors is a better version of barbecue. Some people still like barbecue more. It's always a common debate. I think they're pretty interchangeable, and I think they have their own strengths and weaknesses, but I do think Thrilling Tremors is the more consistent information gathering tool over barbecue. Where earlier we talked about how barbecue can be countered by people jumping into lockers and all that. Thrilling Tremors can't be countered, really. How Thrilling Tremors work is whenever you pick up a survivor, basically any generator that's not being worked on is going to get blocked by the entity and marked white for you for 16 seconds. And any generator that's currently being worked on is just going to be standard, red, and not be blocked. It has a cooldown of 60 seconds, unfortunately, which isn't really a bad thing, or isn't really something that's too crazy. Sometimes it can get annoying if you're downing a lot of people really quickly, which optimally you want to be doing. But basically, pick up the survivor, look around, see what generators are marked as red. Those are the generators that survivors are on, and you're going to want to go to those generators and harass them after you get that kind of information. Best thing about Thrilling Tremors is it pretty much can't be countered. A lot of people claim that, yes, you can counter Thrilling Tremors by letting go of the generator before the survivor gets picked up and letting it be blocked. But even when you do that, you're playing into the killer's favor a little bit, because now that generator can't be worked on for 16 seconds. That's quite a bit of time that's not allowed to be worked on. That's 16 seconds of extra progression that could be happening. And in some cases, this killer could just go over there anyways and see the generators being worked on and start harassing the person. So even when you theoretically counter the perk, you're still kind of playing into the killer's favor a little bit. Whereas with Barbecue and Chile, even though it doesn't have a cooldown, even though it shows you the aura of survivors, when you counter that perk, you're just directly countering that perk. It doesn't help the killer out at all. When you're countering Thrilling Tremors, it potentially helps the killer out in many ways. So it's a great perk. It's the best information gathering tool in the entire game, in my opinion, and for good reason, because it's hard to counter, does a lot for you. It's stall, it's information, it's rotation knowledge. It helps you, it lets you know where to go, and it's just a great perk all in all. And the last perk we're going to talk about, my voice is getting sore for some reason. It's 4 in the morning now. I'm getting tired, but luckily we're almost done. The last perk we're going to talk about is the perk Pop Goes the Weasel. Pop Goes the Weasel is a level 40 perk unlocked from the clown, and it's a great perk. It's amazing. It's the most concentrated amount of regression available in the perk in the game. How it works is whenever you hook a survivor, for the next 60 seconds, the next generator you kick is going to regress by 25% immediately. That is 20 seconds of work, I think. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe I'm messing up my numbers a little bit, but it's about 20 seconds of work on a generator. Pop Goes the Weasel is one of the best controlling regression perks in the game. When you need to control specific generators, Pop Goes the Weasel is amazing. Serge is great because it is something that's low effort, doesn't require a lot of work from the killer, a lot of input. If you're a killer that's downing and slugging all the time and going fast and being real fast about things, like the Nurse, the Spirit, Michael Myers in TO3 or whatever, and you just don't have time, they just go around kicking generators, hooking survivors, doing all this shit. Surge is great. Surge is amazing for that kind of thing, as you're going to be regressing generators on the go. But when you need to select a specific generator, a generator that's like 95% completion, you gotta regress this generator or it's going to go down. It's a generator that's a part of your 3-gen strat. Pop Goes the Weasel is an amazing perk. It's going to be able to help you control that. You're going to hook someone, you're going to walk over to that gen, you're going to kick it, and you're going to regress it by 25%, which is amazing, and it's quite awesome. And one of the best things that can happen is a survivor touches that generator, resets the regression, as obviously it's regressing from it being kicked. They reset that regression, you down another survivor, you hook them, you just go right back to it and you kick it again, and now you've regressed that generator by 50%. A whole half of that generator has been regressed in a potentially short period of time if you're playing your cards right. Very, very good perk. It's amazing. It works on every killer in the game. I recommend it basically on every killer in the game except for a couple that can get away with it or can get away with running some other things like Ruin or Serge. It's good. It's an easy to slap on regression perk that works on everyone, and that's why I think you should personally get it pretty quickly. It was in the Shrine recently, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, I think it was in it not last week, but maybe 2 weeks ago. Either way, if you picked it up in the Shrine, great pickup for you. If not, you might want to pick up the Clown then, just to be able to unlock that perk. Unfortunately, the Clown is not the best killer in the game, but he does come with one of the best killer perks in the game. If you don't like the Clown, if you want to pick him up, there are plenty of other options for you as far as regression goes, like Surge and Ruin, but this is one of the most consistent and one of the most compact, or not compact, what am I saying? One of the most kind of focused regression perks in the game. So, it's all the perks. That's all the teachable perks in Dead by Daylight. Tier list is over. I hope this helped you out. I hope this teaches you a thing or two, maybe teaches you a thing or two about the perks, shows you what you might want to get. At the end of the day, all the perks have, potential, basically. Even the perks that are the worst, that I talked about were the worst, that you shouldn't get, they have potential in some niche formats. It's all about what your playstyle is. It's all about what you're looking for, and that's what's great about DbD. It's got a lot of creativity, and it's got a lot of ways to express your own little playstyle and ways to play. Obviously, the perks I think you should get more or the perks I think you should get faster are the perks that are just going to be better in more situations and situations that you care about as killer over perks that either have bad numbers or only affect a specific aspect of the game that you don't always care about. So, hope you liked the vid. Hope you learned something. Make sure you check out my social media links below. You know where to check me out, where to follow me. If you like what I do, please drop a subscribe. Please drop a like. Leave a comment. Tell me how your day is. I appreciate any kind of support, any kind of love. Either way, that's all for this one. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.